and it goes out and gets stage 2 of the installer. Notice it mentioned that it was unable to probe the video card. That's because the Zen VGA device was not offered to the client because we chose no on enable graphics support. And then we just walked through a normal CentOS installation in text mode.
Go back. Go back to the, or yeah, right there, mention this.
Notice that the disk device changes. It's a virtual disk A. Zen virtual disk is what that stands for. So when you start playing with Grub or FDisk or whatever inside of your guest, you need to be aware of that. So we'll do that. No, we won't review that. We'll just let it do that by itself. Choose all the stuff, and then once we're done, here in just a moment, we'll deselect desktop known, we'll deselect everything, click OK, checks for dependencies. This is going to run through to completion here now. I think I actually have one more choice to make, but while it's working, I'll show you how to do a different class of install. Just want to make sure it finishes. All right, the other interface we have to do an install of a guest is a Red Hat provided tool, which in theory is pretty cool. In practice, it needs a little work yet. Just like everything that Red Hat does, I think they get it out the door just a touch too early. It's cool that they get it out the door early because everyone else follows suit and makes things better.
Release early, release often.
Yeah, that's the life of release early and release often. But let me show you this tool. It's called Vert Manager. The previous version actually lets you connect to hypervisors that are running on this machine, or we can use that XML RPC system to connect to another hypervisor as well. So once we connect, you'll see all the guests that are running. We go in here and we click New, and what happens is we get a little wizard. And it's essentially the same exact questions we got from Vert-install, just made up in a nice little GUI wizard. Give the system name. Class 2, for example. We'll make it para-virtualized. Give it the install media.
And you have to use HTTP URLs.
You use HTTP or FTP. It doesn't support any of the other protocols as of yet.
It does support NFS.
It does support NFS?
I haven't been able to get that to work yet.
I use it all the time.
On the RHEL 5 stuff?
RHEL 5, I have.
Okay.
It's the only one I use is NFS.
Okay, so NFS works as well. That makes us look at maybe our NFS are really wrong.
Could be.
All right.
Oh, don't forget your
Yeah, full URL. Okay, give the name again. Of course, I screwed up and didn't pre-create the volume root. And this one, class 2. And we'll go back to our other window. Walk through all the other steps. Takes a minute to start. But as you notice, it's a full VGA console. You get your little tux in the corner telling you that it actually did load the VGA device. We need to do this manually just to finish it up here. One of the downsides of this being in 800 by 600 is we don't get the full screen, but that'll be irrelevant here in a second anyhow, you'll see why. And that's the artifacts that I mentioned. Why is it sending a request for IP information when I told it to do a
Because you selected IPv6.
My bad. So anyhow, what you'll see here in just a moment is this actually loads up the GUI version of Anaconda. So a full GUI install. All right, let's go back to our other guest and see what was happening there. All right, as you can see, it's just a full text-based install. It's still plugging along beautifully. What time do I have? I've got until lunch, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. There we go. 10.1.0.29.1. And of course, I've got these keys up here. So we set it up with the appropriate IP addresses. /24. Wait, that's my net mess. Oh no, that's my gateway. That was right.
Do you want the same IP address for the other one now?
Did I do 21 on the other one?
I think so.
Yeah.
Just to be safe, we'll do 24. And then it should kick along here in just a moment. Probing for the video card, found the Zen virtual frame buffer, and CentOS 5. There you have it. It's the fully GUI interface. Now this is where I talked about the artifact. This is one thing that happens in the Rel 5 release. I think there's an errata out to fix it already. Essentially, this little window that our console is running in thinks it's as big as the hosting screen, so the main desktop. So when we move our mouse, it moves the cursor inside the guest in a disproportionate manner. So this is my host's cursor, this is my guest's cursor. You kind of have to get used to that. It is taken care of in the later versions of Vert Manager. The Vert Manager that runs on Fedora 7 actually acts quite like the console for VMware, where it grabs control of your cursor and lets you move it around.
Yeah, there is an update for CentOS 5 that does take care of that.
There is an errata out. I didn't know if it was for RHEL yet or if it had just been a Cent 5 update. But there is an errata out. I just didn't have internet access last night to update this machine. So you have to kind of fiddle with which mouse cursor is mine unless you install the errata. And again, you're just walking through. That is kind of disconcerting, isn't it? You're like, oh, what are you clicking? I didn't notice how funny it was. You guys laughed the first time, and the second time is when I noticed the trick. And then, again, the other problem is I don't have a high enough resolution to see all of my screens. But yeah, you see what I'm doing here. I'm just going to go ahead and close this, shut it down, because I've already got a guest that I installed. All right. When we install a machine, we want to get access to the machine. So we've installed our guests. There are various different ways of gaining access to our guests. One of which is to use a package called Zen Tools. Zen-Tools has a very cool interface called Zen Shell. For our intro-level customers, that is the system that we use. We also have a system that we've been building ourselves. I'll show you this on my laptop here. This is an interface that we at Neverblock have been working on. that, oh, of course, I need to bring my network up. If I connect into my web server at our first host, we have this little menu box. And I can go change my console password. This is essentially logging in as onto TTY1 of my guest OS. I can gain over here. You'll see that it stops sitting up still here on guest 1 and just drops us right into the shell of main. So it detached the console and everything. At this point, we can do a lot of fun things. We can take the disk image, migrate it to another machine with SCP. We can take the snapshot image, migrate it to another machine with SCP, and then bring the machine right back up. And the way we do that XM restore and give it the snapshot file. XM console guest 1, and it just starts printing still here again.
Can you take a snapshot without taking it down?
There is a way of doing that. I don't remember the command. We'll look at the output help here. Oh, I'm on guest 1. It is a
Doing that is often called checkpointing in a lot of virtualization systems, too.
yeah. It might be an argument to say make sure here. Save. There's a configuration. There is a way of doing it. I don't recall what it is off the top of my head, though. But yes, you can take a snapshot without bringing the machine down, which would be useful if you're about to attempt to do something stupid, right? And even if I'm attempting to do something stupid, the time that it takes to say that. Once I restored it, you'll notice that my guest-snap still exists. So once I've saved it and restored it, maybe scripting it to do both commands immediately, I think was the other one, save and then store, because it shuts it off and brings it right back up. You'll miss a second or so maybe. But network traffic, most network protocols and so forth that you'd be using machine port would very gracefully handle that.
So this snapshot is only saving basically what's in RAM and what's being executed.
Yes, you'll notice.
So you make that snapshot and then you, let's say, upgrade a package that modifies something in the file system. You can't go back to that snapshot because your file's...
That's one of the biggest problems with snapshots. That's why I love putting my guests on LVM. I do a snapshot of the RAM, and I do a snapshot of the disk, and I'm golden. See, and then it's a full snapshot. So if I wanted to make that, I would have done my XM save, and I would have paused execution, which wouldn't have messed my swap or anything else up. Then I would do my LVM snapshot, back that up to a tarball, whatever you're going to do, right? And then I would do my XM restore. And then I have a full snapshot, full system snapshot. It's kind of cool. That's actually one way that you can pass around. If you were to take the tarball of that and to tar that up with your memory snapshot here, you could send that to someone, and they could, it's going to be a rather large file, of course, but you could send that to someone, and then they could see exactly what you're doing. Like, this system keeps blowing up. Well, let's see what it's doing. Pause it, zip all that stuff up, send it off to someone, and they can unpause it. Wow, that is weird, right? They can see exactly what it was doing. So yeah, that's some very interesting things. That is essentially, I wanted to show you one other thing. Okay. We have these config files. If I were to bring my host down, let's go back to our console. Do wall true, disconnect from the console. If I were to bring the host down, gracefully of course, what it does is it actually pauses, saves each and every one of the guests. There are some init scripts that will save every one of the guests, and then when you reboot the machine, it comes back and restores each of the guests. The trick is it only restores the guests whose config files reside in etc zen auto. So you'll notice.
Will it symlink good?
What's that?
Will it link good?
Yeah, the answer to your question is yes, the symlink does it. So inside of etc zen auto, I just link to one level higher and the corresponding machine. And that way, I don't have to have multiple copies of the guest config file, and I can control which ones come back up upon a reboot.
And you can hard link too.
You can hard link. Symlinks are cooler because you can tell that they're symlinks, and you can tell where they're pointing. So if you have different classes of machines whose config files reside in different locations, so on and so forth. Anyhow, sometimes your config files are going to reside on different partitions. Symlinks are better. Let's look at the config file syntax. It is extremely simplistic. If you wanted to, you could do this all by hand instead of using Vert Install or Vert Manager. Big things you want to look about. You want to make sure you have a disk image. You want to make sure you have a virtual interface. This MAC address, you need to make sure that those are unique if you do it by hand. We had a problem that I had created a virtual guest, and then Lamont created a virtual guest for one of our customers. And about an hour later, we get a call back from 2 customers. My box seems to have disappeared. And couldn't figure out why. Like, well, you got the right IP address, and so on and so on. We just couldn't figure out why. And it happened that we had documented that, we're going to use these MAC addresses and listed them in order. And Lamont and I had communicated, and we both ended up using the same MAC address for the 2 guests that we had created. Therefore, neither of them knew which to. They both responded, and the switch said, "Hey, that's not supposed to happen." So
we came up with a better system.
We came up with a better system that automatically sets our MAC addresses for us, so that we don't have to worry about it anymore. This is a Red Hat specific config file because it's using something called PyGrub, which is a Python implementation of Grub.
Parts of Grub.
Yeah, parts of Grub. It's a Python implementation of Grub. The parts of Grub that matter. Watch what happens when I bring down a guest and bring it all the way back up. I'm going to shut down. This is a ACPI shutdown command, so the guest will actually interpret that and go through a graceful shutdown. If I were to do destroy, it's yanking the power cord out. I'm going to do create to bring it back up. So xn create says re-enable this virtual guest. -C says, besides re-enabling it, also attach me to the console so I can watch what's happening as it boots. And then I give it the config file. You notice anything familiar? That is Python Grub. If we had multiple config lines in the guests, grub.conf or menu.first, we will be able to choose the differences. And yes, because this is a Red Hat box that is the guest, we have our 3-finger security hole, right? If I were to hit A, oops, let's do that again, because I did something else. If I hit A, space, 1, enter, I just booted into run level 1 on my guest, and I can change the password. If I were working remotely trying to set my firewall up, and I did an IP tables minus P input drop before I'd done any of my other rules, who here has done that? Who here has had to drive to the data center at 2 in the morning because they have done that? If you don't do it on your host, you won't have to do that anymore. You just connect to the console, and you're good to go. We lucked out. I did that on one of the hosts, but all of our nodes have draft cards. So I connected to the draft card and got to the console. So I didn't have to fly across the country to reboot my machine so that it would fix the IP tables. But as you can see, here I am in single user mode. Kind of fun. And that is pretty much all I had on the docket to show you. Are there any questions?
If you balloon the memory, how do you notify the kernel that it increases the high reboot?
I'm not real familiar with that.
The kernel has built-in support to automatically detect hot plug RAM as long as it's compiled into the kernel's.
I don't think that the Red Hat
even on
just
bare metal. Yeah, I believe they do, but I haven't checked on it. I don't know if they do it.
I don't think they do.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things.
They want to.
Yeah.
So you most likely just have to reboot.
You just balloon the RAM, and then the system would recognize it and get the appropriate signal.
And by the way, reboot cycles on the guests are so blinding fast. We have customers run a bunch of services in like 10, 12 seconds. From hitting enter on the reboot command to you can log in and all your services are running.
Yeah, the reboot is really quick because you don't have to worry about flubbing around with the BIOS. That's probably the longest piece of your boot process. So a guest reboot is a rather quick process.
What tools does CentOS come with for installing, for example, a virtual server?
None.
But you guys offer other guests.
We're in the process of streamlining that so we can do it. We've gotten them running.
So you take a snapshot of it, copy it over, change.
Yeah, that's the trick. We've gotten them running. We're just making them more efficient before we start offering them. So it's a big headache bootstrapping it. But once you've got them bootstrapped and you've got your images, you just copy those and you're good to go. But the majority of that stuff is headaches that we've had to come across. But there are no tools that come with CentOS. You have to go in and you have to modify the kernel on the guest, you have to modify the initRD, you have to modify various libraries to get it. In other words, you have to make the libraries match a guest of the, you have to make it, essentially you have to make it everything is Ubuntu except for the kernel and libraries. Is essentially what it rolls down to. What it's done to.
Can you do multiple CPU dedicated to the guest, or?
You can, yes. You can pin multiple CPUs to the guest. One thing that's fairly important that you do is if you have a large number of guests on a machine, you should probably pin one of your cores to your DOM0 so that you can manage the DOM0 with little lag. So if you have a large number of guests, in order to be able to manage it without the DOM0 lagging, pinning a CPU to the DOM0 is a good idea.
How do you do that? Is it simple, or just
there's an XM pin, there's a config syntax, and other places. Yeah. Jared, you got a question? No?
If you're using the DOM0 as a workstation, is there a way you can put a guest's virtual console onto one of your own virtual consoles so you can switch between them with control? That's what
The easiest way I've seen of doing that is enabling XDMCP and using X-Forward.
You mean text, like text TTY, like
The
when
text,
it's console, one of your TTYs?
Okay. I imagine you could just put a line in the init tab that runs XM console guest on a TTY.
That should work.
What's that?
I think that should work.
That should work, right? That just putting a line in your init tab that does that.
Like 3 years ago. I figured
I run Windows XP, Ubuntu, Windows Vista, and RHEL, all as guests on my Fedora 7 workstation at my office. Because those are all of our targets for compiling stuff.
How does Vista like the